Welcome to Modern Latin America in 15 minutes. My name is Dr. Kim Richardson, and today we are going to discuss politics, liberals and conservatives. Thematically, this is a very short section because we just want to discuss who are the liberals, who are the conservatives. But in getting around this, we're going to be a little bit more chronological and hopefully a little bit narrative in scope as well. Remember last time we discussed Mexico. It was an empire, the Empire of Mexico under Augustine I, who was the leader of the independence movement under the name of Iturbide. Iturbide then, creating the first Empire of Mexico, His Imperial Majesty Don Augustine I, by divine providence and the National Congress, first constitutional Emperor of Mexico. Is going to see lots of people are opposed to his monarchy. There are a lot of reasons for this, but what we need to know right now is that one of the characters was Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. He was a commander in Veracruz. He established a plan, the Plan de Veracruz, in December of 1822. He's going to rise up and overthrow the government of in Mexico City, the Empire of Mexico. Another was Jose Antonio Echeverri, the Plan de Casa, and together they combined their forces into that name, the Plan de Casa, and they're going to overthrow Augustine I. Indeed, they do succeed in overthrowing Augustine I in this anti-monarchist movement. Emperor Augustine is going to be forced to abdicate and go to Europe. Later, he hears in exile that there is an uprising. There is a movement going on so that Spain is going to try to recolonize Mexico. He comes to try to help this situation, to defend Mexico from Spain's attempted recolonization, but instead he's captured by the Mexicans and executed. And here's a great image of the blood on a letter that was in his pocket. And on this letter it says, "Mexicans, tell your children to think with kindness of the first chief of the army of the three guarantees. If my children should stand in need of your protection, remember that their father spent the best season of his life in laboring for your welfare." And then, of course, that he's executed. 1824. So the first Empire of Mexico fails. Why? Because people, and we're going to see this, do not want an emperor without legitimacy, and the legitimacy weakened because of the economy that was in such disrepair. Now, the first president now of this new republic, Mexico, the United States of Mexico, is going to be the hero of the independence movement, Guadalupe Victoria. His party is going to be liberal. And the vice president is Nicolas Bravo. His party is going to be conservative. Evidently, the example of the United States with John Adams from one political party and his vice president from another political party was forgotten. It is at this time that Central America begins to declare their independence, right? This nationalist movement here, and breaks away. This is what I want to emphasize. When you saw those images up here of Liberal Party, Conservative Party, what is the difference between the two? Simply put, two political parties come about, and they don't always use these names, but they oftentimes do. The one political party, the conservatives, they want a strong central government. They're called centralist. The other political party, they're liberal. They want a weak central government, strong state governments or provincial governments. They're called federalists. It's kind of a weird name if you think about it, because the Federalist Party of the United States wanted a strong central government, but the Federalists in Latin America want a weak central government. The conservatives are pro-clerical, which means that they want to retain the power and prestige of the clergy. They're not pro or anti-Catholic, but clerical, the clergy within the church. The liberals tend to be anti-clerical. Some of them were anti-Catholic, but not all of them. which means that they want to reduce the power of the clergy. What I mean by this is there's a power called the fuero. And the fuero, the ecclesiastical fuero, is what the clergy had the rights to be tried in courts of their own peers. So if they do something wrong, they're going to be tried by other clerics. There are also other things, such as they don't have to pay the same taxes as everybody else, and they have special privileges. Those are the fueros. Liberals said that's not fair because that makes different classes, and we want liberty and justice for all, no matter what, all the same. There were also part of these fueros are military fueros. If you're in the military and you got caught for doing something bad, you would be arrested, of course, and then your commanding officer would come let you out of jail, and then you'd be tried in a court of your own peers. And 9 times out of 10, people argued, you would be let off with a slap on the wrist. The military fuero. Not only that, you had certain prestigious rights that other people did not have. So liberals are opposed to the fueros, and as such, they're anti-clerical, and being anti-military, they want to decrease the power of the military, as opposed to the conservatives, they want to increase the power of the military. The conservatives and the liberals, why are we talking about these? There are two political parties that spread all throughout Latin America. For the rest of the 19th century, if you want to understand Latin American history, memorize the fact that there are two political parties, the conservatives and the liberals. Sometimes with capital C, the name, sometimes with little c. Sometimes with capital L, sometimes with little l. Centralist versus Federalist. Now I want to read something from you, from a great book, remembering that there are liberals now and conservatives, and they're not going to get along. Now, if you go on to read a book about this period, 100 Years of Solitude is the book to read. And in this book, a very interesting narrative takes place. Starting right here. The liberals were determined to go to war. Since Aureliano, the main protagonist at this point of the book, at this time had very confused notions about the difference between conservatives and liberals. What's the difference? His father-in-law gave him some schematic lessons. The liberals, he said, were Freemasons, bad people, wanting to hang priests, to institute civil marriage and divorce, to recognize the rights of illegitimate children as equal to those of legitimate ones, and to cut the country up into a federal system that would take power away from the supreme authority. The conservatives, on the other hand, who had received their power directly from God, proposed the establishment of public order and family morality. They were the defenders of the faith of Christ, of the principle of authority, and were not prepared to permit the country to be broken down into autonomous entities. He goes on to discuss how corrupt this could end up being, as the conservatives would stuff the ballot, and the liberals would stuff the ballot, and then pretty soon, well, let's see what happens. That night, while he played dominoes with Aureliano, that's the father-in-law, is playing dominoes with his son-in-law, he ordered the sergeant to break the seal in order to count the votes. There were almost as many red ballots as blue, but the sergeant left only 10 red ones and made up the difference with blue ones. Then they sealed the box again with a new label, and the first thing on the following day was taken to the capital of the province. The liberals will go to war, Aureliano said. Don Apolinar concentrated on his domino pieces. If you're saying that because of the switch in ballots, they won't, he said. We left a few red ones in, so there won't be any complaints. Aureliano understood the disadvantages of being in the opposition. If I were a liberal, he said, I'd go to war because of those ballots. Well, as you can imagine, he's going to go to war. Okay, with that in mind then, liberals versus conservative. Back and forth. They're going to fight. So Vicente Guerrero, for example, versus his own vice president, Manuel Gomez Pedraza, they're going to have some issues because they have completely different agendas. Well, Spain is going to eventually try to recolonize. And the guy, I forgot to put his name here, but the guy right here, Santa Anna, is going to come to the defense, which brings up a whole new idea of caudillos, strong men, and defend Mexico from Spain. He gets the name Vencedor de Tampico, Salvador del País, Benemerito de la Patria. It is at this point, then, that the United States decides to declare the Monroe Doctrine. This is perhaps the most important doctrine of the 19th century with regards to Latin America and the United States. December 2nd, 1823, sometimes, by the way, it's said in books to be the 1824 Monroe Doctrine because it became much widelier known, is that a word, in 1824. President James Monroe declared that, as a matter of principle, the American continents, by the free and independent condition they have assumed and maintained, are henceforth not to be considered subjects for future colonization by any European powers. We should consider any attempt on the European powers' part, to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. So in other words, what we're trying to say here is whereas Latin America begins to A, divide themselves into liberals and conservatives, B, many European countries, especially in the case of Spain, wants to recolonize Mexico and their now independent colonies, and C, the United States begins to say, I think that if anybody is going to meddle in the affairs of Latin America, it should be the United States, not nobody else, not anybody else. But of course, as we see, and we will continue to see, at the time the United States is weak. The United States is unable to do anything about that repeated meddling. Nonetheless, 1824, the Constitution, on the left here, of Mexico is written, and it is liberal. It is a federalist. It is a replication, in part, of the United States Constitution, which established a federalist republic. Mexico now is a federalist republic, meaning that most of the power is supposed to reside in the Constitution. But in 1836, a new constitution is going to be established to replace the Constitution of 1824. And that constitution is going to be a conservative, centralist constitution. The story as how that came about is going to be discussed in the next lecture, as it relates muchly to the relations in Texas. Nonetheless, I want you to keep in mind that we have the Constitution of 1824, which is federalist, being replaced by a centralist Constitution of 1836. The United States has one Constitution, and we do have amendments to that Constitution, but it is the same Constitution that was established in the 1780s. However, in Latin America, they will have repeated constitutions, and therefore the constitutions sometimes has names, and sometimes has names and dates to go with them to make them much easier. Okay, so that is Latin America in 15 minutes. Make sure that the point of this lecture that you keep in mind is that there are two political parties in Mexico, liberals and conservatives. If you can keep that in mind, then the rest of these lectures, 15-minute lectures, will make lots of sense. Why are people fighting against each other? The whole principal cause is that one wants a strong central government, one wants a weaker central government, stronger provincial governments. One wants equal rights for all, liberals. One wants to retain the fueros, the corporate privileges that they had